Paralyzed Millionaire sat alone at the airport, until the little black girl asked, "Why is he all alone? Nobody should have to sit by themselves like that. Why is he all alone?" The 7-year-old's voice cut through the bustling chaos of LAX airport like a knife to the heart, and millionaire David Chen, paralyzed, bitter, and convinced he'd never matter to anyone again, looked up to see the most beautiful pair of curious brown eyes staring at him with the kind of compassion he'd forgotten existed in the world. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. The departure lounge at Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with the familiar symphony of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and hurried conversations, but David Chen heard none of it. At 38, he sat in his custom wheelchair near Gate 47, staring at the tarmac through floor-to-ceiling windows, feeling as invisible as he had every day for the past 2 years since the accident that had stolen everything from him. The car crash on the Pacific Coast Highway had taken more than just the use of his legs. It had taken his fiancée, his so-called friends, and his will to live. Rebecca had lasted exactly 3 months after the doctors delivered their verdict. Complete spinal cord injury, T12 level, no chance of recovery. "I can't do this, David," she'd whispered, returning his grandmother's engagement ring. "I'm not strong enough." His business partners at Chen Technologies had been more direct. A paralyzed CEO was bad for the company image, they'd said. Better to step down, take the buyout, disappear quietly. The $75 million settlement had made him wealthy enough to never work again, but it couldn't buy back his purpose, his pride, or the feeling that he mattered to anyone. Now he spent his days in his Malibu mansion, ordering groceries online, avoiding mirrors, and counting the hours until he could justify taking another sleeping pill. Today's trip to San Francisco was his first public appearance in 8 months. A legal meeting he couldn't avoid, settling the last of his business affairs before becoming a complete recluse. The first-class lounge was nearly empty at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, which was exactly why David had chosen this flight. Fewer people to stare, fewer conversations to avoid, fewer reminders of the life he'd lost. He'd perfected the art of being alone in crowds, of making himself invisible despite the chair that seemed to announce his brokenness to the world. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Car will meet you at SFO. Meeting at 4 p.m. Try to eat something." Even his employees treated him like an invalid now, he thought bitterly. 3 gates away, 7-year-old Zara Williams pressed her nose against the window, watching planes taxi on the runway with the wide-eyed wonder that adults had long forgotten. Her small hand clutched a worn stuffed elephant named Peanut, the only possession that had survived 3 different foster homes and countless social worker visits. "Stay close, Zara," called Ms. Rodriguez, the social worker who was escorting her to yet another placement. This time it was Portland, Oregon, where a family named the Hendersons were willing to take in a challenging child with behavioral issues. The label that had followed Zara through the system ever since she'd been found at age 4, abandoned at a Chicago bus station with nothing but a note that said, "Please take care of my baby girl." At 7, Zara understood more than most adults realized. She knew that challenging meant she asked too many questions. She knew that behavioral issues meant she cried too much about missing the parents she couldn't remember. She knew that foster families who described children as challenging usually sent them back within 6 months. But Zara also knew things that the social workers didn't write in their reports. She could sense sadness in people from across a room. She never forgot her kindness, and she believed with absolute certainty that somewhere in the world was a family that would love her exactly as she was. "Can we get some crackers?" Zara asked, tugging on Ms. Rodriguez's sleeve. "In a minute, sweetheart." I need to make some calls about your placement." Ms. Rodriguez disappeared toward the customer service desk, leaving Zara to wander within the designated safe zone near their gate. That's when she saw him. The man in the wheelchair wasn't like the happy disabled people she'd seen on TV shows in waiting rooms. This man looked like he was carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. His expensive clothes and fancy wheelchair couldn't hide the deep sadness in his eyes, the same sadness she'd seen in her own reflection in too many bathroom mirrors. But what struck Zara most was how alone he looked. In an airport full of families and friends and business travelers talking on phones, he sat by himself, staring at nothing, like he was the only person in the world. Zara had been alone most of her life, but she'd never seen loneliness look quite so heavy on someone else. Have you ever noticed someone who looked completely alone in a crowd? What did you do? Share your experiences in the comments below. Without thinking, she walked toward him, Peanut tucked securely under her arm. Adults usually told her not to bother strangers, but something about this man made her forget all the rules about staying quiet and being good. "Excuse me," she said softly, stopping just close enough that he couldn't ignore her. "Why are you all alone?" David's head snapped up so quickly his neck cracked. For a moment, he wondered if he'd imagined the voice. Soft, innocent, cutting through his carefully constructed walls like they were made of tissue paper. But there she was, a little girl with cornrows adorned with colorful beads, wearing a slightly too large pink sweatshirt that read Chicago Bears, and clutching a worn stuffed elephant. Her brown eyes held no pity, no awkward sympathy, no careful distance. Just pure, curious concern that hit him like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, rusty from months of barely speaking to anyone. "I asked why you're all alone," Zara repeated, tilting her head with the directness only children possessed. "Everyone else has somebody with them, but you're just sitting here by yourself. Don't you have any friends?" The question landed like a punch to his solar plexus. David stared at this child who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, who had somehow identified the core truth of his existence with the clarity that adults spent years avoiding. He started to give her the standard dismissal, the polite brush-off that sent people away, but something in her unwavering gaze stopped him. "I prefer to be alone." Zara considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. That doesn't make sense. Nobody prefers to be sad. "I'm not sad." The lie felt bitter on his tongue. "Yes, you are." She stepped closer, completely unafraid of his wheelchair, his expensive suit, or the invisible barrier of wealth and disability that separated him from the world. "Your eyes look like mine do sometimes. Like when I have to go to a new family and I don't know if they're gonna keep me." David felt his carefully maintained composure crack. This child, this stranger, had seen through 2 years of armor in less than 30 seconds. "You shouldn't talk to strangers," he managed weakly. "Ms. Rodriguez is right over there," Zara said, pointing toward the service desk where a woman in a business suit was engaged in an animated phone conversation. "She's taking me to Portland to live with new people. I'm supposed to sit quietly and not bother anyone, but you looked so lonely I couldn't just walk by." Something twisted in David's chest. Here was a child who was clearly in transition, probably facing her own uncertainty and fear, and her first instinct was to comfort a stranger. When had he last shown that kind of compassion to anyone? "What's your name?" he heard himself asking. "Zara Williams." "What's yours?" "David. David Chen." He hesitated, then asked the question that was burning in his throat. "What do you mean, new people?" Zara settled cross-legged on the airport carpet beside his wheelchair as if they were old friends sharing secrets. I'm in foster care. That means my real mommy and daddy couldn't take care of me, so I live with different families until somebody wants to adopt me or I turn 18. This will be my fourth family. The casual way she delivered this information, as if discussing the weather, made David's heart clench. 4 families. Yeah. The first ones said I was too loud. The second ones had a baby and didn't have time for me anymore. The last ones. She trailed off, hugging Peanut tighter. They said I had too many nightmares and it was disrupting their other kids. David felt anger rise in his chest, not at the child, but at a world that could fail someone so small and vulnerable. That's not your fault. I know, Zara said with a wisdom beyond her years. But knowing something and feeling something are different, right? Like you know you're not supposed to be alone, but you feel like maybe you deserve it anyway. The accuracy of her observation took his breath away. This child had diagnosed his entire existence with the precision of a therapist who'd known him for years. Why are you in a wheelchair? She asked with the matter-of-fact curiosity of childhood. Most adults danced around the question or avoided it entirely. David found himself answering honestly. I was in a car accident. I can't walk anymore. Does it hurt? Not physically. Not anymore. Zara nodded sagely. But it hurts in other ways. Like when people look at you differently or when they pretend not to see you at all. How do you know that? David's voice was barely above a whisper. Because people look at foster kids the same way sometimes. Like we're broken or dangerous or just temporary. She was quiet for a moment, then added, but you're not broken. You're just hurt. There's a difference. David stared at this extraordinary child who spoke about pain and healing like she'd lived a dozen lifetimes. How old are you, Zara? 7 3/4. But I've been 7 for most of my life, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. David recognized the look in her eyes, the premature wisdom that came from surviving things children shouldn't have to survive. Zara. Ms. Rodriguez's voice cut across the terminal. What are you doing? I told you to stay by the gate. Zara scrambled to her feet, but before she could move away, she leaned close to David and whispered, I hope somebody sits with you on your plane. Nobody should have to fly all by themselves. As Ms. Rodriguez approached with an apologetic smile and an explanation about boundary issues, David felt something shift inside his chest, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart, letting in the first ray of light he'd felt in 2 years. It's okay, he told the social worker. She wasn't bothering me. But as they walked away toward their gate, David realized that wasn't true at all. Zara Williams had bothered him. She'd bothered his assumptions, his isolation, his carefully maintained misery. She'd bothered him awake. For the first time in 24 months, David Chen felt something other than emptiness. He felt hope. David's wheelchair seemed to roll backward on its own as he tried to process what had just happened. The little girl, Zara, had spoken to him like he was a real person, not a tragedy or an object of pity. Her words about everyone needing someone echoed in his mind like a song he'd forgotten he knew. But the walls he'd built around his heart for 2 years weren't going to crumble because of one conversation with a child. This is ridiculous, he muttered to himself, pulling out his phone to check emails he'd already read 3 times. She's just a kid who doesn't understand the world yet. But his hands were shaking as he typed, and the words on the screen blurred together. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted toward gate 44 where Zara sat swinging her legs, completely absorbed in a conversation with her stuffed elephant. Ms. Rodriguez was still on the phone, gesturing frantically at someone on the other end. David had spent 2 years perfecting the art of emotional shutdown. When Rebecca left, he'd convinced himself he was better off alone. When his business partners pushed him out, he'd decided that needing people was weakness. When his few remaining friends stopped calling after months of rejected invitations, he'd told himself that isolation was freedom. But watching Zara, this tiny person who had every reason to be bitter about the world, choose kindness instead of self-protection made something crack inside his carefully constructed armor. His phone buzzed with a call from his lawyer in San Francisco. "David, I have some news about the Henderson case. It looks like we can settle for—" "Not now," David said abruptly, hanging up. For the first time in months, legal settlement seemed less important than the little girl sitting 50 feet away. Zara couldn't stop thinking about the sad man in the wheelchair. She'd met sad adults before. Most of the foster parents had that look after a few weeks with her, but his sadness felt different. Heavier. Like it had been sitting on his heart for a very long time. "You're being too quiet," she whispered to Peanut, adjusting his worn gray ears. "That means you're thinking hard thoughts too." Ms. Rodriguez's phone conversation was getting louder and more frustrated. Zara had learned to read the signs. The tight voice, the rapid Spanish mixed with English, the way adults got when placements fell through. She'd heard enough of these calls to know that the Hendersons in Portland had probably changed their minds. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Henderson, but Zara is a sweet child who just needs stability," Ms. Rodriguez was saying, but her tone suggested she was fighting a losing battle. Zara felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. Another family that didn't want her before they'd even met her. Another case of challenging behavior, being too much trouble. Another move to another temporary place where she'd have to learn new rules, new names, new ways to make herself small enough to stay. But instead of the tears that usually came with this realization, Zara found herself thinking about what the wheelchair man had said. Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose. What if families didn't have to be about foster parents who eventually got tired of her questions? What if families could be about finding people who understood sadness and choosing to make each other less alone? She looked toward gate 47 where the man sat, still staring at his phone but glancing in her direction every few seconds. His expensive clothes and serious face couldn't hide the fact that he kept looking at her the way she looked at families in the airport, like he was wondering what it would be like to belong somewhere. "Zara, come here please," Ms. Rodriguez called, her voice carrying the weight of bad news. As Zara walked back toward her social worker, she made a decision that would have surprised every adult who'd ever written impulsive in her case files. She was tired of letting other people decide whether she was wanted. Maybe it was time to choose her own family. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but the Hendersons have decided they're not ready for placement right now," Ms. Rodriguez said gently, crouching down to Zara's eye level. "But don't worry, we'll find you another family. There's a group home in Sacramento that has space and—" "What if I don't want another family?" Zara interrupted, surprising them both. Ms. Rodriguez blinked. "What do you mean, honey? What if I want to choose my own family this time? What if I found someone who needs me as much as I need them?" Before Ms. Rodriguez could respond, Zara was walking back toward gate 47, Peanut clutched tightly in her arms. She could hear the social worker calling her name, but for once, she wasn't going to be the good girl who followed all the rules and still ended up unwanted. David looked up as she approached, and for a moment, his carefully maintained expression of indifference slipped, revealing something that looked almost like hope. "I thought you might be gone," he said quietly. "My foster family in Portland changed their minds. Zara said matter-of-factly. They decided I'm too challenging. David's jaw tightened. Their loss. That's what I think too. Zara sat down in the chair next to him without invitation. Can I ask you something else? David nodded, though every instinct told him to roll away, to end this conversation before it went somewhere he couldn't handle. Do you think grown-ups can be adopted too? The question hit him like a physical blow. In 7 simple words, this child had identified the core of his loneliness. Not just the lack of companionship, but the deep human need to be chosen, to be wanted, to matter to someone else's story. Zara. Ms. Rodriguez appeared, slightly out of breath. You can't just walk away like that. I'm sorry, sir, she's usually not this. She's fine, David said firmly, his voice carrying an authority he'd forgotten he possessed. We're just talking. Ms. Rodriguez looked between them, the millionaire in his expensive wheelchair and the foster child with her battered stuffed elephant, and something in their expressions made her pause. She's been through a lot, Ms. Rodriguez said carefully. Multiple placements, abandonment issues, attachment difficulties. The system hasn't been kind to her. The system hasn't been kind to any of us, David replied, his eyes never leaving Zara's face. For a moment, the busy airport faded around them. 2 people who had been discarded by the world, one too broken, one too challenging, sat together in the kind of silence that felt less like emptiness and more like possibility. But the possibility was dangerous. David had learned that hope was just another word for inevitable disappointment. I should let you get back to your situation, he said, starting to roll his chair backward. Wait, Zara said, and something in her voice made him stop. What if we're supposed to find each other? What if that's why we're both here, both alone, both sad? What if we're supposed to be each other's family? The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was sure they were brave enough to cross. The mechanical failure announcement echoed through LAX Terminal 6 at 3:47 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 447 to Portland has been delayed indefinitely due to mechanical issues. Passengers will be rebooked on tomorrow morning's flight. Please see the gate agent for hotel accommodations. David watched Zara's face crumble as Ms. Rodriguez hung up her phone, her expression grim. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but the social services office in Portland has closed for the day. With the flight delay, we'll need to arrange overnight care for Zara here in Los Angeles. What does that mean? Zara asked, her small voice barely audible above the airport chaos. Well, sweetheart, it means you'll stay at a temporary facility tonight, and we'll try again tomorrow. Ms. Rodriguez's professional smile couldn't hide her own frustration. David had been preparing to leave for his own hotel when he saw Zara's grip tighten on Peanut, her eyes filling with the kind of tears that came from too many disappointments to count. In the past 2 hours, she'd somehow become his shadow, bringing him crackers from the vending machine, showing him pictures she'd drawn on napkins, asking him gentle questions about his wheelchair that didn't feel invasive, just curious. A facility. David found himself asking, You mean like an institution? Ms. Rodriguez lowered her voice. It's just temporary housing. Clean, safe. But... She glanced at Zara, who was pretending not to listen. It's not exactly child-friendly. More like a holding area. Something twisted in David's chest, an emotion he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. Protection. The need to shield someone vulnerable from harm. What if she stayed with me tonight? The words were out before his rational mind could stop them. Ms. Rodriguez blinked in surprise. I'm sorry. I have a suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel. 2 bedrooms. She'd be safe, comfortable. David's heart hammered against his ribs. I'm hardly a flight risk. Zara looked up at him with such hope it nearly broke his heart. You would do that for me? Mr. Chen, I appreciate the offer, but there are protocols, background checks. I can have my lawyer here in 30 minutes with whatever paperwork you need. Full background check, references, anything. David surprised himself with his insistence. She shouldn't have to sleep in some institutional facility because of an airline's mechanical problems. Ms. Rodriguez studied him carefully, then glanced at Zara, who had moved closer to David's wheelchair. Do you have experience with children? No, David admitted. But I have experience with feeling lost and abandoned. She doesn't deserve that. 2 hours later, David found himself in the most surreal situation of his life. Wheeling through the marble lobby of the Beverly Hills Hotel with a 7-year-old girl walking beside him, her small hand occasionally touching his wheelchair's armrest as if to reassure herself he was still there. This place is fancier than anything I've ever seen, Zara whispered as they entered the elevator. Are you sure I'm allowed to be here? You're with me. That makes you exactly as allowed as anyone else. David realized he meant it. The stares from other guests, curiosity about the disabled man and the black child who clearly didn't belong together, suddenly didn't bother him. Let them stare. The penthouse suite was opulent even by David's standards. Panoramic views of Los Angeles stretching from downtown to the Pacific Ocean, Italian marble floors, and furnishings that cost more than most people's cars. But Zara wasn't impressed by the luxury. She was drawn to the enormous windows. You can see the whole world from up here, she breathed, pressing her palms against the glass. Do you live somewhere like this? Similar, David said, suddenly embarrassed by the excess. Though I mostly just stay in one room. That seems lonely. Zara turned from the window, her directness unfiltered by adult social conventions. Big places should have lots of people in them, don't you think? Before David could answer, she'd spotted the room service menu on the coffee table. What's this? You can order food and they bring it to the room. David wheeled closer. Are you hungry? Zara's eyes widened. You mean like whatever you want? Within reason. For the next 20 minutes, David watched Zara study the menu with the intensity of a scholar, sounding out words she didn't recognize and asking questions about ingredients. Her wonder at simple luxuries he'd taken for granted made him see his world differently. Can I really order the mac and cheese? And the chocolate cake? You can order whatever makes you happy. When the food arrived, they sat at the suite's dining table. David at his customary height, Zara perched on cushions so she could reach properly. The formal dining room that usually felt cavernous suddenly felt intimate. David, Zara said around a bite of mac and cheese. Can I ask you something personal? He nearly choked on his water. Sure. Were you always in a wheelchair? No. 2 years ago, I was in a car accident. He found himself answering honestly instead of deflecting. I was driving too fast, trying to get to a business meeting. Hit a tree. Zara considered this seriously. Did it hurt? Yes. But not just the physical part. It changed everything about my life. Everything. David looked at this child who'd been abandoned, shuffled through foster homes, labeled as challenging, and yet still radiated hope. My fiancé left. My friends disappeared. I lost my company. I thought I'd lost everything that made me. Me. But you're still you, Zara said matter-of-factly. You're still kind. You still helped me today when you didn't have to. The wheelchair doesn't change that. The simple truth of it hit David like a physical blow. When had he started believing that his worth was tied to his legs? When had he decided that being disabled made him less human? "Zara," he said slowly, "you're very wise for 7 years old." She grinned, revealing a gap where her front tooth used to be. "Ms. Martinez at my last foster home said I was too smart for my own good. Is that why people don't want to keep me?" The question was asked with such innocent curiosity, but David heard the hurt underneath. People don't know what to do with special kids sometimes. But that's their problem, not yours. "Do you think someone will ever want to keep me forever?" David looked at this remarkable little girl, resilient, compassionate, wise beyond her years, and felt something shift inside his chest. "I think the right person would be incredibly lucky to have you." As the evening wore on, they moved to the living room. Zara curled up on the massive sofa with Peanut, and David found himself sharing stories about his childhood in San Francisco's Chinatown, his grandmother who'd raised him, his journey from immigrant family to tech millionaire. "Your grandma sounds like she loved you a lot," Zara said sleepily. "She did. She used to say that our purpose in life isn't about what we achieve, but about who we help along the way." David paused. "I'd forgotten that until today." "Maybe she sent me to remind you," Zara said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that seemed to be her trademark. Maybe she did, David thought as he watched Zara drift off to sleep, still clutching her elephant. For the first time in 2 years, the crushing weight of loneliness that had become his constant companion felt lighter. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Los Angeles twinkled like scattered diamonds, and David realized that tomorrow, when Ms. Rodriguez came to take Zara to Portland, his life would return to its carefully constructed emptiness. The thought was suddenly unbearable. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of David's Malibu mansion, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors as Zara sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, teaching Peanut how to drive one of David's old remote control cars. It had been 3 weeks since Portland, 3 weeks since David had made the most impulsive decision of his life, and 3 weeks since his empty house had been filled with the sound of laughter. "Mr. David, why don't you have any pictures?" Zara's question came out of nowhere, as her observations often did. She was holding one of his spare tablets, having taught herself to navigate it with the same determination she applied to everything else. David looked up from his laptop where he'd been researching homeschooling curricula. In the past 3 weeks, he'd learned more about child development, educational psychology, and adoption law than he'd ever imagined he'd need to know. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "In my other houses, people had pictures everywhere. Pictures of their families, their kids, their dogs. But your house just has paintings." She gestured toward the expensive abstract art that his interior designer had chosen years ago. "Where are your people pictures?" The innocent question hit him like a physical blow. David's hand stilled on the keyboard as memories he'd spent 2 years burying came rushing back. There had been pictures once. Dozens of them. Rebecca laughing on their engagement day at Carmel Beach. His parents at his college graduation from Stanford. Business partners celebrating their first major contract in Silicon Valley. His racing team from the days when he'd competed in marathons and triathlons, back when his legs could carry him 26.2 miles without stopping. I put them away," he said quietly. Zara abandoned the car and crawled closer to his wheelchair, her small face serious. "Why? Did they make you sad?" "Very sad." She nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "Sometimes I put sad things away too. But Ms. Martinez at my first house told me that hiding sad things just makes them grow bigger in the dark." From the mouths of babes. David reached for his phone, hesitating only a moment before opening his photo gallery. He hadn't looked at these images in over a year, but Zara's presence somehow made it feel safe. "Would you like to see them?" he asked. Zara scrambled onto the arm of his chair, a familiarity they developed over the past weeks that never failed to amaze him. She settled against his shoulder like she belonged there, which increasingly she did. The first photo made his breath catch. It was from 5 years ago at his company's annual retreat in Napa Valley. David stood in the center, arms around his business partners Jake and Miranda, all of them grinning after closing their biggest deal ever. He'd been wearing his Lucky Stanford t-shirt, the same one that now hung unworn in his closet. "You look happy," Zara observed. "I was. That was the day my company became worth more than I'd ever dreamed possible." "What happened to those people?" David's jaw tightened. They decided they didn't want to be friends with someone who couldn't walk anymore. Zara twisted to look at him, her brown eyes flashing with an anger that seemed too old for her 7 years. "That's mean. My friend Tommy in my second house was in a wheelchair, and he was the nicest person ever. He taught me how to play chess." "Some people don't see past the wheelchair," David said softly. "Then they're stupid people," Zara declared with such vehemence that David almost smiled. He swiped to the next photo, and his heart clenched. Rebecca, radiant in her white sundress, laughing as they fed ducks at Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. They'd been planning their wedding that day, choosing venues, dreaming about their future children. "She's pretty," Zara said. "Is she your wife?" "She was going to be. But she left after my accident." "Why?" The simple question hung in the air. Why indeed? David had asked himself that question 1,000 times, had raged about it, had blamed Rebecca, had blamed himself, had blamed God. "She said she wasn't strong enough to love someone like me." Zara was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the serious consideration she gave to all emotional revelations. Finally, she said, "My birth mama left me at a bus station in Chicago when I was little. She left a note that said she couldn't take care of me anymore." David's hand found her small one, squeezing gently. In 3 weeks, this was the first time Zara had spoken about her birth parents. "Do you remember her?" he asked. "Sometimes I think I do. I remember someone singing to me, someone who smelled like flowers. But Ms. Rodriguez says maybe I just made it up because I wanted to remember." She leaned closer to the phone screen. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Of course. Sometimes I pretend that my mama didn't leave me because she didn't love me. I pretend she left me because she knew someone better was going to find me. Someone who needed me as much as I needed them." The words hit David like lightning. He stared down at this remarkable little girl who had somehow found wisdom in abandonment, hope in rejection, love in loss. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into faith. "Zara," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah. What if your pretense was true? What if your mama knew exactly what she was doing?" She looked up at him with those incredible eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Do you think she knew you would find me at the airport?" David thought about that moment 3 weeks ago when a 7-year-old girl had approached his wheelchair and asked the question that changed everything. He thought about the coincidences that had led them both to Gate 47 at LAX at exactly the right moment. He thought about how empty his life had been just 21 days ago, and how full it felt now. "Maybe she did," he said softly. "Maybe she knew you were going to save someone who really needed saving." "Did I save you, Mr. David?" He looked around his house, really looked at it for the first time in months. Zara's drawings covered his refrigerator. Her books were scattered across his coffee table. Her laughter echoed in rooms that had been silent for too long. A child's bicycle, the first major purchase he'd made in 2 years, sat by the front door, waiting for their afternoon ride around the neighborhood. "You saved my life, sweetheart. In every way that matters." Zara smiled, the radiant expression that had become his favorite sight in the world. Then, with the matter-of-fact tone she used for all important declarations, she said, "Good. Because I was getting tired of saving myself all the time. It's nice when someone helps." David closed the photo app and pulled her into a proper hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the indefinable sweetness of childhood. Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched toward the horizon, vast and full of possibility. For the first time since his accident, David Chen wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was thinking about what he'd found, and what they were building together, one day at a time. 3 weeks later, David's Malibu mansion had transformed from a shrine to solitude into something that resembled an actual home. The sterile white walls now displayed Zara's colorful artwork, crayon drawings of stick figures in wheelchairs holding hands with little girls, rainbows over houses labeled "Home Sweet Home," and her latest masterpiece, a family portrait showing Daddy David, Zara, and Peanut the elephant standing in front of what looked like Disneyland. "We're not standing in that picture, sweetheart," David had gently corrected when she'd shown it to him the night before. "We are in my heart, Daddy David," Zara had replied with the matter-of-fact wisdom that consistently left him speechless. "In my heart you can do anything." Now, sitting on the deck overlooking the Pacific Ocean on a Sunday morning in December, David watched Zara carefully arrange a tea party for her stuffed animals on the outdoor table. She'd convinced him to join her very important meeting, complete with tiny plastic cups and cookies she'd helped him bake the night before, the first time he'd used his kitchen for anything other than reheating takeout. "Mr. Peanut thinks you should have more cookies," Zara announced solemnly, holding up her worn elephant. "He says you're too skinny." "Mr. Peanut is very observant," David replied, accepting another cookie from her small hands. "But I think he's more interested in the cookies than my health." Zara giggled, the sound still new enough to make David's chest tight with unexpected joy. 3 weeks ago, he'd forgotten that laughter could exist in his house. Now it filled every room, along with the chaos of stuffed animals, children's books, and the constant chatter of a 7-year-old who had opinions about everything from his choice of cereal to his reluctance to leave the house. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected. Emergency custody had been granted within days, money and influence opening doors that usually remained closed for months. David's team of lawyers had navigated the system with ruthless efficiency, but the real breakthrough had come when Zara herself had spoken to the judge in chambers. "He's not broken," she'd reportedly said, according to the court transcript David had read with tears in his eyes. "He just forgot how to be happy. But I can remind him every day." Even the Hendersons in Portland had agreed that Zara belonged with David after witnessing their connection via video call. "We've never seen her light up like that," Mrs. Henderson had admitted. "She's found her person." "Can I tell you a secret, Daddy David?" Zara's voice broke through his memories. "Of course, sweetheart." She abandoned her tea party and climbed carefully onto his lap, a gesture that had terrified him the first time she'd done it, convinced he might hurt her or that she might pity his useless legs. Now it felt as natural as breathing. "Sometimes at night, I dream about my real mommy and daddy," she whispered against his chest. "But when I wake up and remember you're here, I'm not sad anymore. Is that okay?" David's throat tightened. In 3 weeks, This little girl had given him more honest emotion than he'd experienced in 2 years. "It's more than okay, baby girl. It means you have a big heart with room for all kinds of love. Do you dream about before your accident?" The question caught him off guard. Zara had this way of asking the things adults danced around, cutting straight to the truth with innocent precision. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I used to have dreams about walking, about the life I had before. They made me angry when I woke up." "Do you still have those dreams?" David considered lying, giving her the easy answer. But Zara deserved his honesty. She'd given him nothing but truth since the moment they'd met. "Not as much," he said softly. "Now I dream about you. About us. About the adventures we're going to have. Like Disneyland. Especially Disneyland." He'd already made the reservations, something that would have seemed impossible a month ago. Leaving the house, facing crowds, navigating a theme park in a wheelchair, it all terrified him. But the joy on Zara's face when he'd told her made the fear seem manageable. She was quiet for a moment, and he could practically hear her 7-year-old brain processing. "Daddy David, are you sad that you can't walk?" Another adult would have changed the subject or given her a sanitized answer. But Zara's capacity for understanding continued to amaze him. "I was very sad about it for a long time," he said carefully. "I thought it meant I couldn't be the person I used to be. But you know what I learned." "What?" "I learned that maybe the person I used to be wasn't as good as the person I could become. The old David was too busy to sit still for tea parties. He was too important for cookie baking. He probably would have been too scared to love a little girl who asks hard questions and sees magic everywhere." Zara lifted her head to look at him, her expression serious. "So maybe your accident was like a present? A sad present that turned into a happy one. Maybe it was, sweetheart. Maybe it brought me exactly where I needed to be to find you. Do you believe that sometimes our biggest challenges can lead us to our greatest blessings? Share a time when something difficult led to something wonderful in the comments." The Pacific breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine from the garden, and for the first time since his accident, David felt genuinely grateful to be exactly where he was. Not in spite of his circumstances, but because of them. "I love you, Daddy David," Zara said simply, settling back against his chest. "I love you too, Zara. More than all the stars in the sky. Even more than your old legs." The question should have hurt, but instead it made him smile. "Especially more than my old legs. Because my old legs never brought me to you." As they sat together on the deck, watching the waves crash against the Malibu shore, David realized that healing didn't always mean going back to who you were before. Sometimes it meant discovering who you were meant to become all along. The tea party continued with renewed energy, Peanut the elephant presiding over discussions of Christmas plans, upcoming shopping trips, and Zara's firm belief that they needed to adopt at least 3 more stuffed animals to complete their family. David found himself agreeing to increasingly ridiculous proposals, discovering that saying yes to Zara's joy was becoming his new favorite hobby. Later, as the sun began to set and Zara dozed against his shoulder, David felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Not hope for his legs to work again or for his old life to return, but hope for the future they were building together, one tea party and bedtime story at a time. The little girl who had asked why he was all alone had given him the answer he'd been searching for without knowing it. He wasn't alone anymore. He was home. The pristine conference room on the 42nd floor of the Seattle Children's Services building felt like a courtroom where David's soul was on trial. Through the wall of windows, the Space Needle pierced the gray October sky, But all David could focus on was the stack of papers in front of him and the words that kept echoing in his mind. Final custody hearing. 3 months had passed since he'd first met Zara at LAX. 3 months of daily video calls, weekend visits to Portland, and the gradual transformation of his Malibu mansion from a mausoleum into something that felt almost like a home. Zara's artwork covered his refrigerator. Her stuffed elephant Peanut had claimed permanent residence on his couch, and for the first time since his accident, David had woken up each morning with a reason to live. But now, sitting across from a panel of social workers, family court judges, and child psychologists, he felt the familiar weight of inadequacy crushing down on him. "Mr. Chen," said Judge Patricia Morrison, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had decided the fates of countless children. "We appreciate your interest in Miss Williams, but we have some serious concerns about this proposed adoption." David's hands gripped his wheelchair armrests until his knuckles went white. Beside him, his lawyer, the best family attorney money could buy, shuffled through documents with practiced efficiency. But David could see the worry lines around her eyes. "Your Honor," David began, his voice steadier than he felt, "Zara and I have formed a genuine bond. She's been staying with me on weekends for 2 months. She's thriving." "With all due respect, Mr. Chen," interrupted Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, the state's child psychologist, "a weekend arrangement is vastly different from full-time parenting. Miss Williams requires specialized care given her history of abandonment trauma. She needs stability, consistent routines, and," Dr. Hawthorne paused meaningfully, "a parent who can physically meet all her needs." The words hit David like a physical blow. There it was, the thing he'd been dreading, the truth that had haunted him through every happy moment with Zara. He wasn't enough. He couldn't run after her if she bolted into traffic. He couldn't carry her upstairs if she had a nightmare. He couldn't be the father she deserved because half of him was broken. "Furthermore," continued Janet Kowalski, the lead social worker, "we have some disturbing reports from Miss Williams' current foster family. Apparently, she's been having behavioral episodes. Crying fits, refusing to eat, asking repeatedly when she can go home to David. This kind of attachment disorder is exactly what we try to prevent." David felt his heart breaking as he remembered Zara's tearful phone call 2 nights ago. "Daddy David, when can I come home for real? The Hendersons are nice, but they're not my family. You're my family." He'd had to hang up before she could hear him cry. "The Henderson family has filed a formal complaint," Ms. Kowalski continued, consulting her tablet. "They feel that Miss Williams' attachment to Mr. Chen is unhealthy and is preventing her from bonding with their family. They're requesting that all contact be terminated immediately." The conference room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Seattle traffic 42 floors below. David stared at the mahogany table, seeing his reflection in its polished surface, a broken man who had dared to dream of being whole again. "Mr. Chen," Judge Morrison's voice was gentler now, "I can see that you care deeply for this child. But we have to consider what's best for Zara in the long term. The Henderson family is young, healthy, financially stable, and they've successfully fostered 6 children. They want to adopt Zara and give her the traditional family structure she needs." "Traditional," David repeated, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. "You mean a family where the father can walk?" "That's not what I—" "No, please, let me finish." David's voice gained strength as 2 years of suppressed rage finally found its target. "You're sitting here in your ivory tower, making decisions about what's best for a little girl who has been thrown away by everyone who was supposed to love her. And you're about to throw her away again because you think I'm not good enough." Dr. Hawthorne leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, No one is questioning your character or your feelings for the child. But we have to be realistic about the challenges. Challenges. David's voice rose. You want to talk about challenges? I've spent 2 years learning how to live again after losing everything. I've had to relearn how to drive, how to work, how to exist in a world that looks at me and sees only what I can't do. And through all of that, Zara, this incredible, brave little girl, looked at me and saw something worth loving. The room was silent except for David's heavy breathing. His lawyer placed a warning hand on his arm, but he shook it off. She doesn't see a disability when she looks at me. She sees someone who listens to her stories, who remembers that she likes her sandwiches cut diagonally, who stays up late helping her with her homework because for the first time in 3 years, I have something important to do with my evening. Judge Morrison's expression softened slightly. Mr. Chen, I understand. Do you? David's voice cracked. Do you understand what it feels like to have someone need you again? To matter to another human being? Because that little girl saved my life, and now you're telling me I'm not worthy of saving hers. The silence that followed was deafening. David could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the familiar burn of tears he refused to let fall. In the distance, a construction crane was building something new against the Seattle skyline, but in this room, everything felt like it was being torn down. The court will recess for 15 minutes, Judge Morrison announced. Mr. Chen, I suggest you use this time to consider whether pursuing this adoption is truly in Miss Williams' best interests. As the officials filed out of the room, David found himself alone except for his lawyer, who was already packing her briefcase with the efficiency of someone who had seen this outcome coming. David, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but maybe. Don't. He held up a hand to stop her. Don't tell me this is for the best. Don't tell me Zara will be better off with people who see her as a project to fix instead of a person to love. His phone buzzed with a text message. With trembling fingers, he opened it and saw a photo from Zara's foster mother. Zara asleep in her bed, clutching a framed picture of her and David from their day at Disneyland. The caption read, "She's been sleeping with this every night. Won't eat dinner. Keep asking when you're coming to get her. Please fix this." David stared at the photo until the image blurred through his tears. In it, he could see the truth that no amount of legal paperwork could change. They belonged together. But belonging to someone and being allowed to keep them, he was learning, were two entirely different things. The conference room door opened, and the officials filed back in. Judge Morrison's expression was set in the kind of professional compassion that David had learned to dread. Mr. Chen, after careful consideration, the court has decided that it would be in Miss Williams' best interests to proceed with the Henderson adoption. All contact between you and the child will be terminated effective immediately to allow her to bond properly with her new family. The gavel came down with a sound like breaking glass, and David felt something inside his chest shatter completely. Somewhere in Portland, a 7-year-old girl was waiting for him to come home, and he was about to disappoint her in the most devastating way possible. As he wheeled himself out of the building and into the gray Seattle afternoon, David realized that losing Zara hurt worse than losing his legs had ever hurt. At least when he'd lost the ability to walk, he'd still been able to feel something. Now he was truly broken in every way that mattered. The rain began to fall as he sat in a parking garage, and for the first time in 3 months, David Chen felt completely and utterly alone again. The silence in David's Malibu mansion felt different now. Not the familiar blanket of isolation he'd wrapped around himself for 2 years, but the hollow echo of a home that had briefly come alive and was now dying again. For 3 days since Zara had been taken away, He'd sat in his chair staring at the Pacific Ocean through his floor-to-ceiling windows, but for the first time since his accident, the view offered no peace. The house still held traces of her presence everywhere. The small handprints on the glass coffee table, the Disney movies still queued up on his streaming service, the half-finished puzzle of a butterfly garden spread across the dining room table. Mrs. Patterson had offered to clean it all up, but David had stopped her with a sharp, "Don't touch anything." His phone had been ringing constantly. Lawyers, social workers, reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story. He'd ignored them all. What was the point? The system had made its decision. Zara belonged with a real family, not a broken man in a wheelchair who couldn't even take her to a playground without causing a scene. The legal papers sat unopened on his desk. Custody hearing scheduled for Friday in downtown Los Angeles. His attorney, James Morrison, had left 17 voicemails explaining that David had rights as Zara's guardian, that the emergency removal had been hasty, that they had a strong case. But David couldn't bring himself to listen to them. "You're not her father," he whispered to the empty room, repeating the words the social worker had spat at him. "You're just a lonely man who got attached to a little girl who felt sorry for you." But even as he said it, David knew it was a lie. In 6 months, Zara had become more than his ward. She had become his reason for waking up, his reminder that the world still held wonder, his proof that love could grow in the most unexpected soil. She had never seen his wheelchair as a limitation, never treated him like he was broken, never made him feel like less than a whole man. The sound of the doorbell cut through his thoughts. David almost ignored it. He'd been ignoring the world for 3 days, but something made him roll toward the front door. Through the security camera, he saw Carmen Torres standing on his doorstep, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Zara's teacher looked exhausted, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. David hesitated, then opened the door. "Ms. Torres." She's not eating." Carmen's voice was sharp with anger and grief. 3 days, Mr. Chen. 3 days, and that little girl has barely eaten a bite. She just sits by the window at the Henderson house, waiting for you to come get her." The words hit David like a physical blow. "Carmen, No." She stepped closer, her voice rising. "You don't get to Carmen me right now. Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've let them do?" David's hands gripped the wheels of his chair. "She's better off with a real family. People who can give her." "Bullshit." The word cracked like a whip. "You want to know what those people are giving her? A room that feels like a hotel, parents who talk about her like she's a project to be fixed, and siblings who see her as the weird foster kid who doesn't belong. Is that what you think she deserves? She deserves parents who can run after her, who can protect her, who can love her." Carmen interrupted. "Because I've seen love, Mr. Chen. I've seen it in the way she lights up when she talks about you, in the way she carries around that picture you took together at Disneyland, in the way she corrected Mrs. Henderson when she called you that man in the wheelchair. She said, 'His name is Daddy David, and he's the best daddy in the whole world.'" The words shattered something inside David's chest. He felt tears burning behind his eyes. Tears he'd been holding back for 3 days. Tears that carried 2 years of pain and 6 months of joy and the crushing weight of a choice he was too afraid to make. "She called me Daddy David," he whispered. "She's been calling you that for months. I thought you knew." Carmen's voice softened slightly. "David, that little girl didn't choose you because she felt sorry for you. She chose you because you're her person, her safe place, her home." David rolled backward, his mind racing. But the social worker said, The social worker is an overworked bureaucrat who doesn't know Zara from any other case file on her desk. Carmen followed him into the house, her voice growing more urgent. But I know her. I've watched her bloom in your care. I've seen her test scores improve, her confidence grow, her smile come back. You want to know what love looks like? It looks like a scared little girl learning to trust again because one broken man decided she was worth fixing his own heart for. The weight of the choice pressed down on David like gravity itself. Fight for her and risk the exposure, the scrutiny, the possibility of losing anyway. But let her go. What if I'm not enough? The words came out broken, vulnerable. What if she grows up and realizes she deserved better than a father who can't even walk? Carmen knelt beside his chair, her voice gentle but fierce. David, every parent wonders if they're enough. But here's what I know about you. You're the man who learned to braid hair so she could have princess hairstyles. You're the man who installed a security system in her bedroom not because you had to, but because you wanted her to feel safe. You're the man who reads her bedtime stories in voices so ridiculous they make her laugh until she can't breathe. She paused, letting the words sink in. And you're the man who taught a little girl that she was worth fighting for. The question isn't whether you're enough for her, it's whether you love her enough to fight. The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and terror in equal measure. Through the window, David could see the ocean where he and Zara had spent countless afternoons, her small hand in his as they watched dolphins play in the surf. She had never asked why he couldn't walk into the water with her. She had simply adapted, building sandcastles within reach of his chair, collecting shells to bring to him, making their limitations into shared adventures. The hearing is Friday, David said finally. I know. I've already written a letter to the judge. So has Principal Martinez. And Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation, but she's been Zara's pediatrician since you first brought her in. And about 20 other people whose lives you too have touched. David looked up sharply. 20. The librarian at Beverly Hills Public Library, where you take her every Tuesday. The pharmacist who saves sugar-free lollipops for her. The parking attendant at the mall who always makes sure you get the best spot. Your housekeeper, your gardener, your physical therapist. Carmen smiled through her tears. David, you think you've been invisible for 2 years, but the truth is, people have been watching you become a father. They've seen the man you've become because of that little girl. The phone rang, cutting through the moment. David glanced at the caller ID. James Morrison, attorney at law. For the first time in 3 days, David answered. James. David, thank God. Listen, I've been going through the case files, and there are some irregularities in how they handled the removal. If we file an emergency motion. Do it. The words came out strong, clear, certain. File whatever you need to file. I want my daughter back. Carmen smiled, tears streaming down her face. Now that sounds like a father. As David hung up and began making the calls that would bring Zara home, he realized that the choice hadn't been between fighting and giving up. It had been between fear and love. And for the first time in 2 years, love was winning. The house suddenly didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was waiting, holding its breath, ready to come alive again with the sound of small feet and bright laughter and the voice of a little girl calling out, Daddy David, I'm home. 2 years later, the sprawling Chen estate in Malibu had been transformed from a monument to isolation into a home filled with the laughter and chaos that only a family could create. The minimalist decor had given way to colorful artwork on the refrigerator, a swing set visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of beautiful disorder that comes with a house full of love. David Chen rolled his wheelchair into the kitchen where 9-year-old Zara Williamson stood on a step stool, carefully decorating cupcakes for what had become their most treasured tradition, Adoption Day. 2 years ago to the day, she had asked him why he was all alone at LAX airport. Today, neither of them would ever be alone again. "Dad, look. I made one that looks like Peanut." Zara held up a cupcake decorated with gray frosting and chocolate chip eyes, grinning with the pride of an artist unveiling her masterpiece. The word "Dad" still made David's heart skip a beat. For the first 38 years of his life, he'd thought success was measured in stock prices and board meetings. Now he knew better. Success was a little girl calling him Dad, choosing him to be her family, trusting him with her heart and her future. "It's perfect, sweetheart," he said, reaching up to wipe a smudge of frosting from her nose. Peanut would be honored. The stuffed elephant sat in its place of honor on the kitchen counter. No longer the only companion of a lonely foster child, but a beloved family heirloom that would someday be passed down to Zara's own children. Through the kitchen windows, David could see the Pacific Coast Highway where his life had once ended in twisted metal and shattered dreams. Now it was just a road that led home, a reminder that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. "Is Ms. Rodriguez coming to the party?" Zara asked, adding sprinkles to another cupcake with the focused concentration of a surgeon. Of course. She wouldn't miss it. David smiled, thinking about the social worker who had become like an aunt to them both. Carmen Rodriguez had fought through mountains of bureaucracy to make their adoption possible, arguing that love and financial stability mattered more than traditional family structures. She'd been right. The doorbell rang with the familiar melody that meant family was arriving. Over the past 2 years, their circle had grown in ways David never could have imagined. Dr. Sarah Kim, the pediatric psychologist who had helped Zara process her early trauma, had become a close friend and trusted advisor. James Wright, David's former business partner who had reached out after reading about the adoption in Forbes, had apologized for his past cowardice and was now helping David launch the Zara Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to connecting foster children with permanent families. "I'll get it," Zara announced, racing toward the front door with the boundless energy that had replaced the cautious quiet of their early days together. David followed, marveling as he always did at the miracle of their life. The legal battles had been worth every sleepless night. The scrutiny from social services, the questions about his ability to parent from a wheelchair, the whispers from people who couldn't understand how a disabled millionaire and a difficult foster child could become a real family. All of it had been worth this moment. Carmen stood at the door with a gift bag and her signature warm smile. "Happy Adoption Day, you too." "Ms. Rodriguez." Zara launched herself into the social worker's arms with the enthusiasm reserved for beloved family members. "Look how tall you've gotten." "And David." Carmen studied his face with professional assessment and personal affection. "You look like a man who's found his purpose." "I have," David said simply. "She saved my life." "You saved each other," Carmen corrected, accepting a cupcake from Zara. "That's what families do." As the afternoon unfolded, their living room filled with the people who had become their chosen family. Dr. Kim brought photo albums documenting Zara's progress from a guarded, anxious child to a confident, thriving 9-year-old who made friends easily and excelled in school. James brought blueprints for the first Zara Foundation Family Center, which would open next year in downtown Los Angeles. But the most meaningful moment came when Zara climbed into David's lap, a ritual that had evolved from their first tentative hug in that hotel room in Portland 2 years ago. "Dad, can I tell everyone the story again?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with the joy of a child who knew she was exactly where she belonged. "Of course, Angel." Zara turned to their gathered family, her voice clear and confident. 2 years ago, I saw my dad sitting all alone at the airport, and he looked so sad that I had to ask him why nobody was with him. And you know what? He didn't know either. But then we figured out that we were both alone because we were waiting for each other. The room fell quiet, as it always did when Zara told their origin story. Adults wiped away tears, remembering their own moments of loneliness, their own searches for belonging. And now we're never alone, Zara continued. Because we have each other, and all of you and Peanut, and our house and our family. And Dad says that sometimes the best things happen when you think everything is broken. David hugged his daughter closer, remembering the man he'd been 2 years ago. Bitter, hopeless, convinced that his accident had ended his story. He'd been wrong. The accident had just been the first chapter of a much better story, one that began with a little girl's question and led to a love deeper than anything he'd ever imagined possible. Do you believe that our greatest challenges can lead to our greatest blessings? Share your own stories of unexpected hope in the comments below. As the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, painting the Malibu sky in shades of gold and pink, David and Zara sat together on their deck, watching the waves crash against the shore. The same ocean that had once seemed like a barrier to the world now looked like possibility itself. Vast, beautiful, and full of adventures yet to come. Dad! Zara's voice was soft, contemplative in the way that meant she was thinking big thoughts. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think there are other people out there who are alone and don't know they're waiting for their family? David smiled, his heart swelling with pride at his daughter's endless capacity for empathy. I'm sure there are. What do you think we should do about that? I think, Zara said with the serious tone she used for important decisions, we should help them find each other. Like how you found me, but maybe we don't have to wait for airports. That's exactly what the Zara Foundation is going to do, David said, amazed as always by his daughter's wisdom. We're going to help lonely people find their families. Good. Zara nodded with satisfaction. Because nobody should have to be alone when there are so many people who need love. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, father and daughter remained on their deck, no longer two broken people trying to survive their separate tragedies, but a family planning how to heal the world, one connection at a time. The millionaire who had once sat alone in airports now understood that his greatest wealth wasn't in his bank account. It was in the trust of a little girl who had chosen to love him, in the family they had built together, and in the knowledge that sometimes the most profound questions come from the smallest voices. 2 years ago, Zara had asked him why he was all alone. Today, surrounded by love and purpose and the infinite possibility of tomorrow, David finally had the answer. He had been alone because he hadn't yet met the daughter who would teach him that family isn't about blood or biology or perfect circumstances. Family is about showing up for each other, especially when the world feels impossible. Family is about a little girl with a stuffed elephant and the courage to ask hard questions. Family is about a broken man learning that his scars could become the foundation for something beautiful. And sometimes, family begins with a single question asked by someone brave enough to care about a stranger's loneliness. Thanks for sticking with this story till the very end. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next story is crazier, more shocking, and will blow your mind. Click the image on your screen now and dive right in. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single twist.